everyone, welcome to the first instalment in what I hope will become a regular feature on this channel, a podcast. If you follow me on TikTok, you might have seen I do car chat videos, and I really want it to be an extension of that and make these fun, and of course have themes, because we've got to have some form of structure. I have been talking about possibly doing a pod for ages, and I'm glad to be finally starting out doing one, but please bear with me while I get my bearings and get sorted with the formatting. But let's just stop waffling for a minute and let's just start. For my first pod, I'm going to talk about one of my top tier indie authors. Actually, I think she is just the only top tier indie author. I will always support indie authors, and I will always read and create content for them where I can. But drum roll please, we are talking about the one and the only Elizabeth Jeffery and her book Changes, which I believe was my first physical book that I received from an indie author to read and review, and since then we have stayed friends, and I always continue to support her where I can, and I'm even in her street team, because when she said that she was going to do a street term, I was like, I need to be in this. This is where I need to be. I am going to try and plan in for a later date a part 2, so that I can get Elizabeth on the pod and I can ask her questions. We can have questions sent in from you guys, and we can just talk further into the book and talk more in depth about the characters, the plot, where the story came from, etc, etc, because these are the type of things that, like, when I read a indie author book, that I like knowing where it came from, where the ideas came from, if it was something that inspired them to write it, or if there's like a part in the book where it really stuck with them, like a point where maybe I keep saying that, my whole brain's gone fuzzy, but yeah, I'd like to know if there was like a point where they were planning the book and they thought of a scene, so they based the book around needing to get to that scene. You know what I mean? But let's get into the book. To start with, I will read the blurb of the book, and on screen you should be able to see the cover as well. A quiet town in the sticks is being ravaged by animal attacks. The newly graduated Hannah doesn't know this when she moves there, but it doesn't take long for her to find out. Hannah's life has always been complicated, but when she meets a charming police officer, she doesn't know just how much more complicated her life is about to become. All she knows is that something is telling her he's not being entirely truthful with her. Inserting herself into the investigation, Hannah must navigate truth from fiction in order to prevent from getting killed, or worse, heartbroken. Right away from the blurb, you're drawn in, and the book's not even been opened yet. Just from the blurb, you're getting a mystery element, you're getting a possible romance that's going to go sour, and you're getting a character that's going to be strung along in an adventure that she's going to find out stuff along the way, and you're going to go on this journey with her. If we look at the cover first of all, and before we dive into the book, we do need to have a little look at the cover. As you can see on the screen, the cover itself is unique, and not like any other book you find. The design is eye-catching and it's appealing, and makes for a book that is something that you want to display on your shelf. And this applies to book 2 as well, which I will show on the cover. I will show the cover on the screen, I should say. And if you follow this creator on TikTok, she has actually bedazzled book 1's cover. I'm not sure if she's done book 2 yet, but I know she's definitely done book 1. So go to her channel to check that out. I will pop her details on the screen so you can see and go and find that video. So let's get into some tropes, because this has a lot of tropes in my opinion. So we've got possessive MMCs, we've got small town, friends to lovers, trauma representation that is done really, really well in my opinion. We've got found family, mystery, heavy on the mystery, wolf, shifters, and a he falls first. And that list alone is just a selection of the tropes for changes. It's just a mixing pot of tropes that all work together so well and they just work. But there is so many that you can't just pick a few. You have to just go with all of them because they all feature at some point in the book. And I think that's what makes this book good, because it's really a book for everybody. There will be a trope that anybody can enjoy, and I think that's, well, if you're picking up a book, that's what you want, because there might be one that you don't like, but there'll be like 5 that you do. And I think that's really important in a book, to have something that's going to appeal to everyone. My personal favourite trope in this is possessive MMCs, because who doesn't love possessive MMCs? You know, real life, no, but in a book, yes. Chef's kiss. Touching on a few of the characters now, of which I'm sure I could do a whole episode just on the characters alone. There is quite a few that are introduced, but do you know something? They all work so well, and it doesn't feel too much. Like, you do have some books where there are so many characters you can't keep track. In this one, it's very easy to keep track of them. They come in and out, and they're introduced so well, so they are memorable. Our FMC Hannah comes into town, which is called Northcrest. Cool name, right? Yes, it is. And in her life already, she's had to deal with a lot of trauma, but she is also a strong individual, I would say. She moves here for a job at the museum and stays with a wonderful character called Dora, who is described as, when we first meet her, it's probably easier if I read a quote from the book. So this is at the top of page 4. The lady who greeted Hannah could have been in her 70s. She was shorter than Hannah by a few inches. Her short, salt and pepper brown hair contained more salt than pepper, but her bright, warm face was crinkled with age. She wore a lavender blouse and a pale cream knee-length skirt. On her feet were brown fabric slippers with cream fur lining. Certainly not at all what she had expected when she was told she'd be working with the curator of the town's Heritage Society. I will say this for Elizabeth, as well as being really thorough with her world building. She's very talented at describing characters, because I can imagine exactly how Dora looks, and I just instantly loved her. Hannah as a character I really like. I think she's really relatable, and I think a lot of what she's been through will resonate with a lot of people, and I think her experiences will be things that people can relate to, because of course she does, Elizabeth does representation really well of trauma. She writes it really clearly, and I just can't falter on it. Now in comes the first MMC we are introduced to, Rich. He is the cop in town investigating strange animal attacks. He is a tall, good-looking man, neatly trimmed beard, tanned arms, giving off the gruff exterior of a cop that can't say much about what's going on in the investigation, even though he does let something slip, but you're going to have to read the book to find out what that is. As always in the books that have both romance but also underlying mystery element, can we trust him? Only time will tell. Mwahaha. Now we come to our second MMC, Lucas. We get introduced to him in chapter 8 when Rich takes Hannah to his house that he shares. Lucas is described as having a dazzling smile, dark brown, almost black hair, tattoos decorating his arms, his muscles flex, and let's face it, we'd all be staring, which Hannah definitely is. This is the setup for very much a love triangle in the book, which is, I know for a lot of people, a very Marmite trope, but do you know what? I love a love triangle if it's done right, and Elizabeth definitely does it right. We love. So we have heard briefly about our main characters, which I want to go into with Elizabeth in more depth in a part 2 of this, when I can get us both together in the same place and we can talk about it. I do want to, though, read a snippet of the book, the first chapter to be precise. Now, I'm going to read the first 2 pages of chapter 1. So, chapter 1. Northcrest was a small town in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of forest. At least, that's what an internet search had told Hannah when she'd looked it up. The town was so small that she'd had to crawl the depths of the search engine to find anything even remotely related to where she would soon be living. The bus had dropped her over 6 miles outside of town. Her feet ached from walking, begging her to stop with each step she took. She should have taken a cab, wished that her bank balance would have allowed it. Hannah's suitcase rattled on the uneven pavement, breaking through the otherwise silent winding road. Not a single vehicle had passed her. Resorting to hitchhiking was something she'd considered a few miles back, if she'd only seen someone to actually flag down. As the hot summer sun beat down on her, she was glad she'd at least had the forethought to tie her long brown hair back into a ponytail, although nothing was stopping the beads of sweat from forming on her skin. She knew she was getting close when buildings started appearing. After hours of travelling along open roads with no sidewalk and nothing but trees as far as the eye could see, she trudged forward, her muscles burning from overexertion, silently willing her legs to carry her for just a short while. When the lines of trees finally broke, she saw the town's welcome sign. She could have cried. The main road, which led to the centre of town, seemed endless, but at least there were sidewalks now, and Hannah could get out of the road. Buildings lined either side of the strip of concrete that appeared to be the only way in and out of Northcrest. Local shops hummed with the sound of residents greeting each other warmly, chatting and laughing. Occasionally a shop's bell would chime to indicate someone entering or exiting. Hannah's dry mouth screamed at her for some kind of refreshment as she passed a small cafe. A few people were sat at tables outside the front, sipping drinks contained in glasses mist over with condensation. Hannah licked her lips, exhausted and aching. She desperately wanted to stop and drink something, but she wasn't sure she'd ever be able to stand back up again. And she was almost there. At least she hoped she was. With more willpower and self-control than she thought she had, she pressed on. In the distance, the town hall stood large and proud, its huge white pillars making the air seem denser than it actually was. Beyond the town hall and round the corner was where most of the residents lived. Some folks lived out of town in the forest in much bigger houses. Here in town, the houses were condensed and squished together to make room for the ridiculously large fountain that laid in the centre, and an even bigger museum off to the side. The houses might have been small, but they weren't run down by any stretch of the imagination. Each house that was so close to the next they could be touching had its own picture-perfect front lawn, bright green, lush and decorated with bushes, trees and flower beds. The houses were made from large grey stones and had matching mahogany doors and windows. It should have been creepy how similar they were, but in a strange way it suited such an unusual town. Hannah stopped walking to check the piece of paper that she had shoved in her back pocket. Glancing at each house's black iron numbering, she unfurled the rumpled note and checked the address she'd scrawled there. When she found the house that matched the number written on the paper, she shoved it back in her pocket. Standing at the edge of the property, where the lawn and picket fence met the sidewalk, she looked up at the house. This was where she was going to live. Her house was on the end of a row of meticulously identical houses. Where the others had adjoined houses on both sides, hers had the... Gosh, Sophie, you're reading and you can't even get through a sentence. Her house was on the end of a row of meticulously identical houses. Where the other houses had adjoining houses on both sides, hers only had the one. On the side that met the street was a wooden fence surrounding the rest of the property, which presumably led to a garden. Attached to the wooden fence was a matching gate with iron hinges and a circular handle. She tried to remember the last time she'd lived in a house with a garden, let alone one as big as this. Very few of the foster homes she'd ever lived in had gardens, and if they had, they would either be so small and run down it wasn't safe for any human to be in, or she wasn't allowed to go in for one reason or another. Taking a deep breath, she shuffled down the narrow path, and careful not to ruin the grass on either side with the wheels of her suitcase. I think for me personally, right from the prologue and the first chapter, I was got hook, line and sinker. And I know you're probably thinking, oh well, that's your friend, you've got to say that. But it generally did get me, and I devoured this book. And after I finished, I begged for book 2. And when you read it, you will understand what I mean. You will get to the end and immediately want to read book 2 and carry on with the story, because there's lots of questions that get posed. You have questions as you're ending the book, and you just need the answers to them. The ending of this book did have me shocked, and the jaw was on the floor. So just to end on, I am going to just pick a random page in the book, read a snippet, and that's what we are going to end on. Maybe this was a mistake. Deciding to turn back and head home before it was too late, she stepped out of the clearing and bumped into a hard chest. She looked up to see Rich's shadowed face. Thank you guys for joining me on the Reading Portal Pod. I've been your host, Sophie. I would love to hear what you thought of the podcast, and I would love to hear if you have read Elizabeth's book and what you thought in the comments. And I will always try and get back to comments, and I will reply to them. Until next time, have a wonderful week. Read the best books. Pick up an indie author book. And yeah. Bye, guys.